Hello. Today's interview with Mayor Harmon is brought to us by Shannon Len at the Len Collective, and I've recently discovered her store. It's my new favorite place to walk into. I used to love going into Full Circle when it was downtown slow, and it closed down, and then Therapy opened up downtown slow, and I loved that place. They had funky, neat, one-of-a-kind stuff, and then that place closed too, and I kind of had a hole in my soul. I was like looking for a place that was going to delight me that much. And then I walked into the Len Collective and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so neat in here. I love it in here. Like, as I look around, I'm like, this is me. This is me. Um, so they have really neat things for your home, for your self-care, like things like lotions and potions and crystals and things to just bring specialness to your bedroom or kitchen. I would totally recommend it if you are looking for a gift for a loved one that you want to make a statement. Like, totally check out the Lynn Collective. They're at 715 Higuera, downtown Slow. And you can go to their Facebook page and see how she really curates stuff that is like really focused on artisans and things that they create and things that are respectful to the earth. You can go to her Instagram account. So Facebook is Len Collective. Instagram account is Len Collective. And you'll see political stuff that'll make you smile and little quotes that are uplifting. And go to her website, and she has a curated section from things that are based in San Luis Obispo, California. I love the little stickers and pins. And also, like, Shannon has a activist heart, and she's done drives to collect items to send to families at the border. I just adore everything about them. So please go check them out if you haven't, online or in the store. Tell them Claire sent you, and I hope you guys enjoy. I just love, love, love you guys. Thank you for sponsoring today's episode. Bye.
Okay, so here's the inside scoop. Here's a little peek behind the curtains. Surprise, I'm not perfect. I invited Mayor Harmon to be on my podcast a long time ago. It was early summer 2019. She was so kind. She said, yes, I'd love to. We set it up. We immediately had the interview. June 2019. I messed up the audio. I had recorded it in my bedroom in my home. And when I listened to it, the playback, luckily you hear Mayor Harmon's amazing answers, but unfortunately you couldn't hear anything I was saying. So with the help of my brand manager and friend, Kevin, we are going to work to make it seem like a normal conversation and a normal interview. So if something doesn't sound natural or something's a little bit off, that might be why. But I'm going to laugh and say sometimes you have to be a disaster before you can be a master. So as I learn and grow, I want to say thank you, listeners, for understanding. I want to say thank you, Mayor Harmon, for being so quick to say yes, so supportive, encouraging of me, and so patient as we took a while to get this out to iTunes, YouTube. It's October 2019, and I want to say a special thank you to Shannon Len and Len Collective for your grace and your kindness to me and support and patience. You are wonderful, and I can't wait to do some Christmas shopping at Len Collective. I love you guys. I love you, Mayor Harmon, as a mayor, as a person. I love you, listeners. I'm so excited to get this out. Here we go. Enjoy. Hi, Mayor Harmon. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you? Great to be here.
Great. I feel so excited and so nervous to talk to you. I feel like I'm talking to one of my greatest idols in the world and also like a really close friend.
That's really funny. That's really sweet.
Okay, so for anyone out there that doesn't know you, do you want to talk about your journey becoming mayor of San Luis Obispo?
Sure. I think the brief version would be that I was really dedicated to raising my kids And in the middle of that, so to speak, so I think my kids would have been around 10 and 12 or so, when I started to understand what was happening with climate change and that my kids' lives were going to be impacted and potentially shortened by climate crisis, I decided to jump in and start figuring out what I could do to be part of the solutions to what I see as a defining issue of our time. And so that led me into activism. And so I've been doing that type of work for the past maybe 15 years or so. And then eventually that led me to run for office. I ran for state assembly in 2015 against a candidate, an incumbent that I knew I couldn't win against, but I also saw that as a really great opportunity to get a conversation about climate change, about energy, and about the issues that I cared about sort of introduced into the local community. And then I decided to run for mayor in 2016 and was lucky enough to win by 46 votes and just ran for re-election this past year and won by quite a bit this past time. So that's how I got here. And since I've been mayor, we've been able to do a lot about a lot of different important issues here, but we are really leaders in the United States on our carbon neutrality goal and many of our other climate initiatives. So it's been a long process, but I'm grateful to be in a position now where I am really bringing some of these policies around climate change to life here.
So do you want to explain what carbon neutrality is? Because we have a goal of being carbon neutral. Can you speak to that?
Of being carbon neutral by 2035. So basically the simple way of thinking about it is that we would be able to create as much clean renewable energy as it takes for everyone to live here. So, and or be able to, we're really shifting also into things like carbon sequestration as well. So what that means is we will either have here or have access to clean renewable energy. We'll also be working on efficiency. Mostly you'll see efficiencies happening in the built environment. Increase public and sustainable transportation. And then also we're going to be adding into the mix this coming up year carbon sequestration programs, which is a way of utilizing all of this gorgeous open space that we have to maximize the opportunity to grab some of that carbon out of the atmosphere and get it back into the ground in a way that's healthy for the people, the environment, and also the soil. So that'll be another way of getting to our carbon neutrality goal by 2035.
Yeah, with the presidential election coming up next year, I'm already getting so many emails with different organizations and different candidates asking me with straw polls, what's important to you? What matters to you with the upcoming election? And it's like 40 different topics. And I'm like, oh, they're all so important to me. But I mean, climate change really has to be at the top for me. Okay, so you have a really huge social media presence and you're always out and about doing different things. And I feel like if I could bring up the Jay Leno jaywalking, where he goes on the street and asks questions like, who's the vice president of the country, or who's the secretary of state? Nobody knows. I feel like if we walked around San Luis Obispo and said, who is the mayor of San Luis Obispo? I think most people would know. Heidi Harmon. Heidi is our mayor. Because you're so supportive of so many different groups, not just people of a certain age, but people of all ages. And I was curious, you carve out time for yourself intentionally to recharge, like say I take Sundays for myself or something like that?
So yeah, so knowing what to say no to and creating some time for myself, is that the main question? Yeah? Okay. So I do believe strongly that showing up is so important. And so I do try and show up where I can, where I feel like my presence will be valuable to either an event or even just one-on-one with someone, especially if they're having a struggle or an issue that they want to have addressed. And you're right that, I need to also show up for myself. So actually this past year, I have been adding in more what I would call discernment into where and how and with whom I spend my time. So I have been trying to be more precise and discerning in those decisions. And I do spend sometimes I try and have days where I'm fully on and days where I'm not. And just in terms of my public relationship. So I do create days where I don't have any appointments or meetings or speaking engagements. But I'm usually still doing what I would call the work. So I am either reading or writing or those kinds of things about these topics that I'm interested in, trying to grow my own knowledge and grow my own thinking about climate crisis, income inequality, racial justice, all of these things that I have a deep interest in, to try and figure out how I can play a role on those. But I do carve out a lot of time to be at home just with myself to create more expansiveness around thinking about those things. So that's been my approach this past year, and trying to take good care of myself, eat healthy, exercise, all of those basic self-care ideas. Because it's a challenge. It's challenging to be in the public eye. People can also be very critical, and so it's important that I take good care of myself as well while I'm trying to be supportive and show up for other people.
Okay, so I love that. I've noticed that you are really comfortable and really good about being around people outside of your own age and gender. And when the students at Slow High School were walking out to speak out against climate change and they wanted to stand up and speak out about gun control, and they're doing performances at their school, they're supporting them. You're out with families biking to school on Bike to School Day, and then personally you have friends that are much older than you are. Or do you have advice about getting close with people outside of your normal circle of friends?
I think it's just so important to hear from a variety of different voices. I'm very interested in figuring things out. I'm very interested in trying to understand what climate crisis is really about, and therefore trying to figure out how we can really solve for it if that's possible. And I think a big part of that is connection. I think connecting with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds is key to getting those different perspectives and key to having a more vital, interesting life experience in general. I appreciate my intelligence, but I never feel like I'm the smartest person in the room, regardless of if I'm with some young children or high schoolers or elders. I try really hard, and I actually don't know if I try, because I just don't have that feeling of I'm the smartest person here and therefore I'm closed off to what other people are saying. I'm really open, generally speaking, to those other conversations. One of the things I really appreciate about this role is being able to lift up other voices if possible. So in terms of the young people that were participating in the climate strike, I thought that was I'm in full support of that movement in general. I love that it's young people led. And so they're the ones making the decisions about how they want those events to go, who they want to have speak, and what kind of support they need. So I'm happy to just sort of be silently there supporting them. Even though in that particular case, that's a really good example of something that I feel really strongly about, that I feel was in my value set to support, but not everyone in the community agreed. There was definitely a lot of pushback about, on the one hand, a mayor advocating for what they were describing as, advocating that students be truant from school. But I think that there's a much bigger conversation around the climate strikes that needs to be had, that these kids recognize that there's, for one thing, no point in even going to school if they have no future. So they're fighting hard to be part of that. And that, frankly, we've blown it. People in my generation and older than me have not done right by the future generations. And so I feel at the very least I can go and support them in this moment as they, rise up and claim their own space and being part of the conversations to turn that around.
It must have felt so wonderful for them to see you.
Yeah, it was great. I love to see the young people out there doing that work.
You know Sean King. He is a social activist. He's on social media. I follow him on Instagram, and I know he talks about struggles that Black people have and what people that are white are getting right. I know you personally have been an ally to different groups, minority groups, and when there is a bombing or shooting in a Muslim mosque, you had come meet your Muslim neighbor day. And I know I've learned recently there's a difference between not being racist and being anti-racist. And I wondered if you had any advice. I know certain people are thinking, I'm not racist, I'm not part of the problem, but maybe there's more that we could be doing as allies to Black community.
I think this whole topic is so important and so challenging. I would highly recommend people do a lot of their own anti-white supremacy work within themselves, and there's a lot of resources out there. The book White Fragility, I think, is a really good resource to just get in touch with how we are all racist in that sense that we're all in this racist system, and that those of us that are white are implicitly benefiting from that system, even if we're not conscious of it or amplifying it or understanding it or taking advantage of it or any of those things. We're still, would I be mayor if I were Black in San Luis Obispo? Just like in my own life. So it's a very complex, layered topic, and I think I would just one of my thoughts in terms of your question and or in terms of advice is that it's something that is evolving for me that I'm actively working on. So I'm always struggling to gain more insight. And I think that asking the people in that community what they need, what does standing with them and supporting them actually look like in that moment, definitely not making an assumption and getting into what can sometimes be described as sort of a white savior mode where we feel like, oh, I'm going to help these people and I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. And it really ends up becoming about you as the so-called savior person. And so really checking in with marginalized groups, people of color, and all of those different ways that manifests itself, to check in and see, what do you need in this moment? And I think also making the shift from, and this is a shift I've been making in my own life, from, I want to be a voice for the voiceless. And sometimes that's all you have. So sometimes it is key to speak up and be a voice for the so-called voiceless. But what's much better is to, if you have the mic, to step aside and hand that mic over to somebody that can speak for themselves. And so I think those of us that have an activist heart, it's really easy to get this wrong. And I think we all just need to be patient with ourselves and with each other as we struggle to figure out the best way to be. And then building these real relationships, showing up for the NAACP on a regular basis, hearing from them and not making an assumption about what they're struggling with here in San Luis Obispo, for example. And then making sure that you're, like in my position, that I'm keeping all of those voices in mind in terms of my decision making around policy as well.
Yes, as you brought that up, this popped into my mind that you identify us as a welcoming community.
Yeah, that's one of the things I am really proud of, the welcoming city status that we have here, which means that we won't use any of our local police department folks to investigate anyone based on their documentation status alone. Of course, if anyone commits a crime, they're going to be pursued. And if they happen to also be undocumented, that is going to probably come into play. But we're not going to pursue anybody just on the basis of their documentation status. That and the moving away from celebrating Columbus Day and instead celebrating Indigenous people here have been two things that I feel really grateful that we've had the opportunity to do since I've been mayor. And I think those things, the Indigenous Peoples Day thing, sometimes people feel like, well, that doesn't mean, that's just symbolic and whatnot. But those symbolic things are huge. And it really, I think, says we, first of all, are naming and honoring our history here. And we recognize that Columbus did not discover America, that this land was inhabited already. And, those things I think are really important because they have value in and of themselves, but I think especially in a community that is so devoid of diversity, that we need to be really mindful of the culture that we're creating by those things that we honor and lift up and celebrate.
I had a lot of LGBT friends when I was in high school, and several of them moved away from San Luis Obispo because they didn't feel comfortable or they didn't feel supported here. And I see what you're doing to support the LGBT community, and I'm really proud that you're our mayor, and I'm happy to see what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. Was there a question in there? Because you cut out a little bit.
I really wanted to just say thank you for being a good ally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll be speaking at Pride in a couple of weeks. And this community has gone through a lot around that issue too, especially at the high school. But the high school, the superintendent has done a beautiful job of responding to some of those concerns in a really thoughtful way to ensure that the students are feeling seen and heard and supported at the high school. So we're always evolving.
That is awesome. That is so exciting. It sounds like we have this super awesome trifecta. The school is doing good for kids. The mayor is doing good. Police, law enforcement's doing good. Chief Cantrell, let's see, she first came onto my radar when the Women's March was happening.
She's great. She's really has a heart for trying to change the view of policing. We all recognize that this is another place that systemic racism really plays a strong role and has some really tragic outcomes at times. And she is committed to changing that whole lens that people see policing through, and that also that the way that the police are interacting with the community. So in our particular case, we have an officer that is the liaison to every identified marginalized group, that so they build that relationship, they consistently connect with those folks. And then if there is something that happens where they need extra support, that way that they've already built that relationship and they can check in and see from a police perspective if there's anything that they need. So for example, when there was a shooting at a synagogue, we have our officer that has built a relationship with the folks at Congregation Beth David so that he can check in with them and see, are you feeling safe? Is there more we can do? All that kind of thing. So yeah, she's done a lot.
I wanted to shift my questions over to your family life for you now.
Okay.
I see your two beautiful children, Jack and Zoe. They're really present for you, and they were there with you as you're being sworn in, and you mention them in social media and you check in with them and text and phone calls. And I wondered if you had any advice for new parents, especially those of us that want to have a position of authority as parents, but also have strong, loving presence.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's such a struggle. I think that you have to have really clear, strong boundaries in any relationship in order to be loving, actually. And, I was just listening to something Brene Brown was talking about. And from even this research data perspective, she did all this research on compassion. And they interviewed tons of different types of people. And they found that this certain, they had this certain group that was extra compassionate, say. And the only thing that they had in common, the only trait that this group that was exceedingly compassionate had in common was the ability to create and maintain strong boundaries. That was the consistent thread. And as soon as I heard her say that, I thought, oh, that makes so much sense. So especially with your children, I think people probably make an assumption or made an assumption about me that because I homeschooled and we were doing things differently, that it was sort of anything goes in my house. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I feel kids don't feel safe under those kind of parenting conditions. That whole idea that let them do whatever they want, that's not healthy or safe for kids. They need, and depending, it has to be age appropriate. So you continue to give them, space to make their own decisions when it's appropriate, of course. But they need to be really clear about what's acceptable and what isn't. And then they not only learn that, but I think they feel really safe during those kind of, when things get bumpy. They know, I know my mom has got me. She's not going to let me go totally off the rails. So that's just my personal approach too. And I think another really helpful piece of parenting advice is giving kids choices, and maybe parents out there are already doing this. But instead of saying, if you do that, you're going to sit in a timeout. More like, you can choose to do this, or you can choose to do this, and if you choose to hit your sister, you're choosing to sit in a timeout, and so then they really get in touch with their own agency. So instead of it, and it's the same outcome, it's the same behavior, it's the same outcome, but the process, I think, really is more empowering for them. You're making a choice to hit, you're making the choice to go to your room, or however people want to manage those types of things. And really reminding them as you're, facilitating that consequence. Again, it's too bad that you chose to hit your sister and that you chose to go to your room, because then it's a totally different thing. Than just kind of coming from up high and yanking them and saying, now mom is going to put you in your room. So I think those kind of subtle but really important guideposts I found them to be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's a really valuable skill to have as a parent, to be assertive and comfortable in your decisions and choices. So as I bring it to your career, can you talk about speaking in an assertive and confident way without being aggressive, and how that is?
I think that's really important, especially probably, well, for everyone, but I think it's a struggle probably for women in particular to assert themselves in a way. And again, this is also about boundaries too, and to know that we are valuable, and that we came here to take up space, and that our voice is important as well, and all of those things. I know that this has been something that I've been evolving with too, that sometimes when you don't start off being assertive, you can easily end up being aggressive, right? Because if you don't assert yourself and say, hey, I have something to add, I know for me, it can build a lot of resentment and then shift me into feeling like I have to be really aggressive. Because now I've got some anger behind that. And now I've got some energy behind it that it may not be helpful. So I think it's something that, I think you have to constantly work on, is figuring out with your personality type and, how you can calmly, with strength, assert your view or whatever the situation is into the conversation. But it's key.
This made me think about, I saw recently that you're becoming a yoga teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about how that fits into your life and what turns you on to that goal?
Well, I think that I really love yoga. I'm really interested in the sort of Venn diagram between health and wellness, climate change and activism, and spirituality, for lack of a better word, which is not a word that I have been really using until recently. But what I'm noticing is that I think that climate crisis and so many of the income inequality, racism too, it's really it's a spiritual crisis. It's a crisis of separation. And I think with climate change, we are so separated from ourselves, from each other, and from nature itself, that all of that separation allows us to destroy the planet, destroy each other, and on many levels destroy our own selves. We see the way people are treating their bodies. We see this, obesity just going off the charts, and or people that are just, so overly stressed, all these toxic ways that people are engaging in the world and in their own bodies. And I'm really curious. I just see all of that going together. The way we treat our body, the way we treat the planet, the way we treat women and girls in particular, all of those things seem very, very much connected to me. And so the yoga was really about, I'm trying to figure out something, because I feel like I'm in a position to engage people in a way that can educate, empower, and inspire them to be co-creators on, essentially saving our own selves. That's my why. That's my hope and my goal. And I think that through something like yoga and other fitness modalities, there can be something much bigger happening there than normally might take place in your average yoga class. So I'm really curious about that.
So, Heidi, I know who your personal role models are, past, present, and future. Bernie Sanders and Al Gore, and I saw Rosario Dawson recently was cheering you on during your election run. But as far as mentors, like physically present in your life, is there anyone that's been like, here, let me take your hand and show you the way? I know you've never done this before. And
I hope I'm not forgetting some amazing person that I should be noting right now, but honestly, I've been a little bit more of a pioneer in some ways in my own life. And I've always been a little bit or a lot bit of like, I'm going to do my own thing, or well, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do what needs to be done. I have a lot of self-worth. So I'm grateful for that. So I think there's just part of my personality. I just have that feeling of like, well, why not me? With all like due humility and all, I mean, I make mistakes every day. I'm learning every day. So I never felt like, oh, I'll be perfect for this. But I also feel like, well, also I keep looking around, and quite frankly, that's what I said in my TED talk too, like looking around thinking, I'm totally happy to follow someone. But at that point, I wasn't really seeing anyone to follow, which is why I just started to step in to these roles and say, well, okay, I'm just going to start figuring it out. And then I would say when I decided to run for mayor, it was probably quite the opposite, that, running against a 20-year incumbent was unexpected from probably big swaths of the community. And there was definitely not anyone that was established that was saying, this is great, you should definitely do this and we'll support you. So mine was more coming from the grassroots, a lot of people that traditionally probably felt like they weren't that connected to the political system. And having worked on Bernie's campaign here and built a huge progressive movement here, there's definitely a lot of people in those places that were supportive, but they weren't really in a mentor position.
Okay, so I saw your TED Talk and I wanted to share a quote that came from your TED Talk.
Okay.
You say, the potential doesn't hinge on what we already know. It hinges on what we're willing to do. Whatever speaks to you so deeply that you must do it, that you must act, then act. Do the thing that you can't not do. And that's how you make the impossible inevitable. So I see your drive and I see your passion and I say, yeah, let's do this. And I'm so excited and I'm so invigorated, and everything that you and Aaron Gomez and Andy and all of our leadership in San Luis Obispo is doing to get us carbon neutral, I'm just so excited for.
To me, I think that's one of the gifts of this moment. There's so many hard things going on. And, with climate change in particular, we have such a small amount of time to make a difference on this issue. Like, this is so real and so urgent. And it can create a lot of grief and hopelessness and all of these things that are hard. And to me, I think it's a huge gift, because sometimes when I either feel like giving up or falter or just feel like, I don't know if I could do the thing I need to do, I remember like if people are going to judge me and all that stuff, it's like, who cares? We have such a short amount of time to be effective change makers that we need to be thoughtful, sure, but we do need to just go for it. And so I would encourage your listeners to ask them the same question I asked myself, why not me? So why not you? In whatever issue that is calling you, why not you? I think we're have a lot of assumptions about people in positions of leadership, and I can say that before I was mayor, being mayor is my first office job. It's the first sort of so-called even real job I've ever had. When I was homeschooling my kids, I was a single mom and I was a house cleaner. I have a college degree. I've done all those things, but I was really committed to prioritizing my kids. And for me, that ended up looking like being a single mom, house cleaner, homeschooling my kids. And so I think it's important for people to know that, I'm not saying anyone can do necessarily anything, but a lot of us could step up into roles that we don't necessarily see ourselves in. We should start seeing ourselves there. You can go from, in my case, from mom to maid to mayor, and I wish more women and girls especially would, claim those kind of pathways.
Yeah, I feel like it's a mental prison, and so we need to take those around us that
Mm-hmm.
are considering or ourselves and shake them and say, hello, why not? Why not you? I'm sitting here every day watching the nightly news and seeing the oceans are flooded with plastic and we're in so much debt and all this stuff is going
Mm-hmm.
on. It feels like it's
Mm-hmm.
impossible to solve. And I feel like I'm so happy that you and Aaron and Andy and Aaron are fighting the good
Mm-hmm.
fight and giving us the fighting chance. You're all doing the work and you're showing us tangible things that can be done to make the world a better place. Getting rid of single-use plastic at city events and getting on your bikes and riding them and just showing us the
I
way.
think building connection and community is the most important thing we can do. I used to have monthly potlucks that were open to the public at my house, and I think of all the work I've done, that maybe in some ways created the most community benefit and the most good. And I think if I could invite people to do one thing, that would be to invite your neighbors over to share a meal. And I think that you will be really surprised on how valuable that can become. Or even just invite a couple folks over for dinner. I like potlucks because it alleviates a lot of pressure on the person who's hosting. But however you feel comfortable doing that, I think that's one thing that will have ripple effects throughout your life and your neighborhood, that will be extremely impactful.
Thank you so much for that. I love that you did that. I hope others will do the same. I will be sure to link your social media
Okay,
page in
great.
the show notes. And thank
Okay.
you so much for taking time to talk to me
Yeah, it was my
today.
pleasure. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Have a good week.
Okay, all right. You too. Bye bye.
Okay, you guys, so do you see why I love and admire Mia Harmon? I'm really excited wrapping up this interview to get it out. It's been a long time coming, and I feel like finishing a good book. Like, I don't want it to end. Like, I want to open up discussion with my listeners. Like, let's delve even deeper into these topics. So hopefully we can get some conversations going on social media and on my website. And I'm very thankful for our talk. Thank you, Mayor Harmon. And thanks, guys, for listening. Love to you and yours.
Hello. So the Len Collective gets another shout out from me. They actually supply the decals for Race Matters Slow, and Race Matters stands for responsibility, action, compassion, and education. And the decals that they created say slow welcomes. And the slow welcome decals were created in response to a national rise in violence and hate speech toward people of color, religious minorities, immigrants, refugees, and the LGBTQ community. So local businesses in San Luis Obispo are displaying these decals and and tongue twister, outward showing of support and contributing to a culture of inclusion in San Luis Obispo County. So I want to thank Shannon, Len, and the Len Collective for being like a hub of goodness. And I want to thank you for being good role models. And I want my daughters to see that these are the kind of people that we are. And so the decals say, we welcome all sexual orientations, gender identities, countries of origin, race, religion, and ethnicity. We welcome you and you are safe here. I just love you guys and I thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for sponsoring this episode with Mayor Harmon.